Good morning, Deirdre.
Good morning, Tom. How are you today?
I think that you would like this view.
I love that view. I want that house. That's a perfect New England setting, isn't it? For a house? Lovely.
Yes,
And
you
nice.
make I can see that for sure. This is Rhode Island, Deirdre, taken earlier this week, actually.
Yes, that's
So
right. The New England turning of the leaves will, because of the proximity to the ocean, will be less intense or less far ahead than it was up in Massachusetts and Vermont, pictures you've shown before. So.
I have. So today we are on the third part of our organizing structure for um, essentially viewing the world. Right. So our organizing structure is made up of three pieces, and this is about seeing the world and trying to make sense of the world, no matter what you're doing. The first is assess, to assess the situation. The second is to decide what to do about it. And the third is to accomplish what you've decided you're going to do about it. And we've chosen those words carefully to extracting them a bit from what we're used to, because what we're used to has certain connotations, certain meanings, and we're getting across. We're trying to say there's a slightly different approach to taking to this. So, with that, Deirdre, I'd like to let you take and just brief us on the key aspects of this accomplish piece, the third piece of our organizing structure of assess, decide, and accomplish.
Glad to do so because you know that I believe in getting results, and that's all that this accomplish is about, getting the results and making sure you're getting the results correct. And it all starts with execution. Um, and the other two parts of it are its execution, adjusting as needed, and achieve the outcome, all of which ties back to our first topic of assess, and we'll get into that later. But let me stay focused on the first element, which is execute the plan first. Now, when we were filming the video on the decide part, which is when people were building their plan, I brought in some of our favorite authors, Peter Drucker, Warren Bennis, Larry Teike, who all talk about how to make decisions. But part of the decision-making process is building the execution into the plan itself. That's why I'm bringing them up again, that this is a standard way of thinking about getting some things done, making a plan viable. Too many leaders, and you and I have seen it so many times, Tom, just write a strategy, develop some to-do list, and throw it out to the organization, and nothing gets done, and it's judged a failure. But all of the authors that are our favorite authors, along with us, believe that you've got to make sure that you get the results that you want. So my favorite author that I'm bringing in this time is Larry Bossidy, who with Ram Charan wrote the book Execution. This is the second edition of the book. It's the discipline of getting things done. And that's an important point. Bossidy says that execution is a discipline in itself. It has processes, it has ways to work, it has things to pay attention to. Now, several weeks ago, we actually filmed a video talking solely on the execution book, which means there's going to be a lot more detail in that video than I have even time for to discuss now. I'll just give our listeners the highlights now, and people interested in Bosidy's full argument can go back and listen to our video on execution. But what Bossidy says is that given that execution is a discipline in itself, there are three building blocks and three core processes. Let's start with the building blocks. The first building block is a leader's seven essential behaviors. Now, you and I have been talking about the characteristics of a leader. These drive behavior. Bossidy is talking about behavior here. And what he's talking about is that when leaders, and I'm condensing his argument again because of time, when leaders build their plan, they have to know the business and they have to be realistic about it. and we'll get more into that in a second. They need to create goals, specific goals, and these goals actually cascade down through the organization so that everyone in the organization knows what they're supposed to be accomplishing. And this is another essential behavior, which is that you reward people for the work done. You don't just have these standard, oh, everyone gets a 10% raise, or these days a 2% raise, or whatever. That you reward people when they meet their goals, which is why it's so important for everyone in the organization to have goals and to be assessed on their work in relation to their goals. He also says leaders have to follow through on this. And this is basic change management. And you and I have talked a lot about change management, and we'll talk about it, that leaders must be visible and be doing work throughout to make sure that the execution is right. You can't just leave it to others. Leaders, because they are responsible for the results and publicly held responsible for the results, must be seen as driving the work toward the results. That's the execution throughout. Then what leaders always have to do is expand people's capabilities. People, and I'll talk more about this in a second, people have to be able to meet their goals, to do the work expected of them. It is the leader's responsibility to make sure that people have the knowledge and the skills to deliver on their goals, to deliver the results. And then Bossidy also makes a point that leaders have to know themselves, to know when they have to learn and adjust their behavior to accomplish these things. So you've got a leader out there doing this. The next building block is creating the framework for cultural change. This is so important, Tom, and so overlooked, that the organization needs to be capable as an organization for executing the strategy. Let me give some examples. Industrial age organizations tended to be very siloed, that work was done by divisions and so forth. In the digital age, it is likely that work is done across silos and across divisions. What this means is that the culture of the organization needs to change for the exchange of information, of work, of personnel across all their divisions to accomplish properly. This may require the cultural change of creating teamwork, changing the organizational structure, creating co-learning experiences so people can learn topics across, just generally building learning organizations. Another key aspect of this is communication. Communication in the industrial age tended to be top down. In the digital age, it needs to be, yes, top down, but also bottom up and sideways. Communication needs to be happening all over the place so that people not only get the information they need, they learn what other people are doing so that they can build on the work of others, so they can find things out, so that they can promote their own ideas, which may be what actually makes the execution work. Particularly from the frontline people who are in direct contact with the customers, these people need to provide that feedback from the front line up through the communication channels so this becomes part of the execution plan throughout the organization. Lots more to say about this, but I've got to move on here. The third building block is to have the right people in the right place. This is so obvious. But in the industrial age, and both Drucker and Bossidy and Bossidy and then Taihi and Bennis in their books give examples of, particularly in the industrial age, people allowed to, oh, let's give him a year to grow into his position. Or let's like he isn't meeting his goals, but he'll get there. Or he's my person and I want my person in that role. And in all of these cases, there was failure of the leadership. You need to have the person in not only the leadership, but also the executive and managerial roles, and then certainly down with the people doing the work who have the skills, knowledge, capabilities to do the work, to direct the work, who know when adjustments need to be made, and so forth, so that the work actually gets done. In the digital age, you don't have the leeway to allow the wrong person to be in critical roles. So those are the building blocks. And then in terms of the core processes, these are circular, but they need to be circular. The three core processes are people, strategy, and operations. The people process is people must be linked to strategy and operations. This is so obvious that the strategy must be built on the people you have, or the people that you can develop, or the people you can acquire. That the operations are run by people, so the right people must be in the right places. That's the whole people process, the link to strategy and operations. And then when you go down to the strategy process must be built on the people or operations you either have or can develop. And that includes the cultural change we've just been talking about. That strategy must be linked to what the organization can do, either at the moment or what you can build in a very short time so you can execute within your schedule. And then you get to the operations process, which needs to be linked to strategy and with the right people in place, so that these core processes of the organization, the people, strategy, and operation must all be linked. Then Bossidy goes on to say that once you've got all of this execution happening, then you've got to do your assessments of what are happening so that you can adjust as needed. Now, at this point, I'm going to take a breath and turn it back over to you, Tom, to talk now about building in the assessment and adjustment aspects.
All right, that's great. So thank you for that. So one of the things you and I talk about is that this age we're living in is so different than the industrial age where a lot of these concepts were built. And how do you translate this into today's world, right? Because there's incredible wisdom in much of this literature that comes from there. And you and I are seeing weaknesses in today's literature that are not translating these things well from where they were to where they could be today. And one of the things that I think is helpful in the way to think about this is saying, how do you translate what you've just talked about? I think the first point is about goals. And notice that you were taking this from the Tichy and from the execution book by Bossidy and team. We think in terms of getting things done. And I think you're on more solid ground when you think about, how do I define getting things done in the job that person needs to do for me? What is it that's going to get things done, right?
Right.
And that becomes what you and I might translate into the industrial age definition of goals. And that's why we say accomplish those things that we've defined getting done rather than achieving a goal, right? It's accomplishing versus achieving. It's a different thing in the way that it's thought about. And so we think about that when you're looking at, how do I figure out how to evaluate my execution, right? And we talk about, you have to start with and reverse engineer from the end point. What is it that I want done? And then how do I reverse that, engineer that into an operating plan, an execution plan? And then how do I evaluate it? And that's the process we're going through now, because we think that you not only have to execute on the plan, but you have to then constantly evaluate and then adjust, right, to be able to achieve. So we're saying, what is that end result? Well, we have one concept called value exchange, and we've talked about that in fairly significant fashion prior to this. I'm sure we'll spend more time on it at some point. But then the other concept is this concept of getting things done. And that's what this is about today. It's about getting things done and changing your thought process, not changing, but perhaps sharpening your focus to getting things done. And then backing your way into how do you do that? How do you accomplish getting those things done? There are two things that I think are helpful here. One is the fact that within any organization, there's a cadence of the organization, and basically cadence is defined, should be defined by your ability to respond to the market, because the market is moving quickly. And as you and I've talked about at the beginning of this series, starting with assess, that the world is moving in an incredibly rapidly and increasing pace. And that's because it is no longer just sitting defined on the ground, right? We're all sitting on one layer above the ground, and that's called this digital infrastructure, or you and I call this a digital platform. And that digital platform has a cadence. And that cadence is being defined by the technology that's running that digital platform. And that cadence is increasing every single day. And as we've said many times, that puts an element of a little bit of tension in people. And it's so one of the things we'll talk about, and we will talk about, continuously, is leaders need to find a way to be to preserve their sanity as these cadences are occurring and increasing around. But it means that your organization has to have an increasing cadence. And what that means is you have to increasingly get things done. That's essentially what it means. And you and I are going to do something, going to record an interesting session soon on Starlink as an example of being able to get things done in a huge way that others are having trouble with. And we think this element of cadence, organizational cadence, is an issue. Then there is the issue of the job cadence. It's the jobs inside that organization and what kind of cadence do they have? Because somebody who's selling could be selling to a large organization, and that cadence means it takes a year to make one sale. Where at another organization, it could be, or even a different part of the same organization, it could be that selling that product or service could be done daily. So could it be accomplished daily? So figuring out that every organization has different job cadences, and not to assume that every job has the exact same cadence. The question is how can you define meaningfully getting things done? What does that mean? And it means different things for different jobs. And how do you then evaluate the work of that person based on what you're asking them to do, meaning what you're asking them to get done for you within the organization? There's one other aspect, Deirdre, that you and I are going to spend time on soon, and this is the aspect of how do people learn and how have they learned to learn, right? And we believe that when you observe how you and I learned, we've spanned all the not only the industrial age, but we've spanned the intermediate shift to the digital age, and we're now living in the digital age. And we're trying to learn in all three conditions. And the observation is, well, how has that learning changed? And we believe the learning might have changed, at least our view of this. And again, opinion of one in all of this, but we're two. Because I did confirm this point with you just a few minutes before we started the recording, because I wanted to make sure I was representing you properly. But that. So, but you see, there's the digital life imposing itself on you when you least want it to.
Exactly. Yes.
But we believe that when we were in the industrial age, we were instructed to do things. Now, whether you did self-instruction or you had someone instruct you, that was the way the world worked. The digital age is a different world. The digital age is about learning through doing. And so today, you don't get a device generally, and let's just talk about iPhones or an iPad. You don't get an instruction manual. It doesn't come with an instruction manual. where that would have been unheard of during the industrial age. You would have gotten a thorough instruction manual along with it, and you would have taught yourself or gone to a class on it. But
Mhm.
today, the digital native learns by doing. And
Right.
so this goes back to making sure you have thought your way through, how do I make sure I understand that the learning in my organization, if it needs to coincide with doing things. It's you're learning by doing and you're accomplishing things and making sure you make that distinction. We know this just from the work we do with entrepreneurial companies, where you see that part of the issue is how do I get somebody in, let them learn, right, by doing, and then convert them into productive use. And how can I bridge that gap and make that smaller? And we've got one company that's focusing on exactly that.
Right.
But we see that distinction, and that distinction is important to make. So that when you're thinking about all these concepts and they're really valid, the thoughts that came out of those two books, how do you translate? We think you have to translate with these thoughts in mind: getting things done, organizational cadence, job cadence, and then this thought about learning through doing rather than learning through being instructed. Now, there's a place for instruction in doing. It's figuring out, how do you make sure when you are instructing in this environment, you're doing it with the outcome being to do.
Yes.
And that's an important thing. And because otherwise it's going to be difficult for the digital native, or even for people like us who have put ourselves in this environment and are adapting to it, to see ourselves in that structure if it doesn't come at you that way. So that being said, I'm now going to take a pause, Deirdre, and let you come back to your structure and guide us through this further.
So much of what you just said, Tom, relates to the culture of the organization, which is why Bossidy has it as a key building block, which is why it's a building block in change management literature and so forth. That you need to have the people who are doing the work that you need to get done. They need, obviously, to know what outcomes each of them are to do. Frequently, especially when you're doing some new initiative, they need to learn. And it's important for the people involved in leading, managing these people to make sure that they get that learning. It's part of the culture to make sure that the learning gets through. You and I have both spent too many times in dark auditoriums watching someone give a slide presentation. Maybe it stuck, maybe a phrase or two got through. That today in the digital age is likely not going to be your best way of making sure that your organization is learning. You need to build in the hands-on capabilities the digital natives want. You need to build in the ways to get questions answered, the ways to be shown things to be done. You need to relate the use of devices to particular work. Remember, a lot of the digital natives know how to use devices, but they may know how to use them to do something in this way, while their work now requires them to use devices in different ways. So that whole chain needs to be followed through so that all of the workers in an organization know how to use the tools at hand to accomplish their goals, to deliver the outcomes that they want. And again, this all ties back also to the people understanding that this work needs to get done. Remember that you and I started this whole train of thinking about the need for the organizing structure with our assess, decide, and accomplish in terms of leaders needing to understand how to navigate the now in the digital age. What we're doing right now is getting down to the real nuts and bolts of the sorts of things leaders need to understand, need to get done in the digital age, likely in a quite different way than they were accomplished in the industrial age, because the work is different, the workforce is different, the managerial processes are different, and so forth. In terms of processes, this is why the review and reward processes need to be so critical in the mind of a leader that the only way you get the outcomes you want is when, as Bossidy says, you reward the people who deliver the right outcomes. And that means that the process needs to be in place for the right type of manager to deliver the right type of review to the worker so that the outcomes are delivered. And then, of course, let's take this further. You're talking about cadence. The other parts of this whole accomplish thing, remember the accomplish has three parts: execute, adjust, and achieve the outcome, need to be part of the regular cadence of the operations of an organization. You don't simply throw something out there and expect it done. You need to build in the adjustment cadence so that the adjustments are done at the frequency required. This is where you and I talk about time. This is another aspect of the time importance here, so that the assessment underlying the adjustment gets done in time, so that the adjustments are made in time, so that the adjustments can then work to deliver on the outcomes here. And so let's talk about this. In some initiatives, the leaders have to assess daily what's going on. That's built into the cadence of the leader's day. And then the leader's assessment goes right down the chain, communicated right down the chain, so that if needed, managers can change the work of the frontline workers so that the right adjustments are made, so that the right outcome is delivered. In some initiatives, it may be that you can wait a month before doing the full adjustment. That is, you give yourself, you build the cadence so that you're assessing. You and I both know as leaders, you're assessing every day, but you have a full month of assessment before you can figure out the right adjustment to be made, which is then built in the work that cascades down through the organization and gets to the workers. In the industrial age, the cadence for adjustment was usually the 1-year strategic planning process. That is no good in the digital age. I would actually say that a month is the longest that a leader can go before. It's not even a quarterly adjustment, although quarterly is better than an annual. I think it really can go no more than a month before any adjustments need to be made in terms of the marketplace, the work being done, the goals to accomplish, reviewing, making sure that the workers are doing the right work, that the job descriptions, and now we're getting back to, do you have the right people with the right skills and capabilities? That the job descriptions are right so that there is no dissonance between what a worker feels they should be doing and what the expectations are that they should be doing, and between the work to be done, so that there's congruence all throughout the structure of the organization. And then it all comes down to the leader's cadence for getting the work done, all aimed at achieving the outcome. Time for me to take a breath so you can pick it up again here, Tom.
So this gets back to, and so let's explore this point about evaluating, because we talk about the process of execution, evaluating and adjusting, and then assessing, and right. So there's a whole process that you work your way through. So the evaluation, when you're trying to figure that out, we talked about the cadence of jobs. So it's really hard when there's not a delivery of something on a daily basis or monthly basis, excuse me, a momentary basis,
Right.
Like a production facility that produces things on so many per hour or so many per minute, or even daily. It's hard. But the real key is making sure that you, when you start with yourself, as you're managing your own self, it's about your allocation of your time that day. That's what it is. It's about allocation of time. And so the real question is then, how are you doing with the allocation of your time to achieve what you're wanting to accomplish, right? To get to delivering that thing, so that if your thing takes a week or it takes a month or it takes a year, how are you allocating your time on a daily basis to get there? And what's really helpful, and you do this with me, is that every day you help me evaluate, how am I going to spend my time that day, right? And we do that early in the mornings. And it's funny because you and I haven't seen each other personally in, I don't even know how long now, a year and a half, maybe,
Something like that, yes.
maybe even longer. I think it's actually been longer than that. But we talk almost every day that we're working together, and that means almost every day. But you help me decide, am I making the right allocation of my time? Um, Even though my delivery sometimes goes to where I'm doing things that, in one case, I'm working on a book that's going to be taking much longer than I'd like to. And in another case, I have a something to publish on Thursday. And in another case, I've got to film something today and again tomorrow, right? And how am I using my time to get ready to do all these things and doing the research? And we evaluate, do I have the time to research a topic? Do I know a topic, right? So that's where you're taking somebody whose actual delivery cadence may be out a bit. The way that you can help them is not by demanding they deliver something, but helping them make sure they have thought through the proper allocation of their time on a regular basis to get to that point. So, because we frequently get this question, or I know I do, and I'm sure you do too, Deirdre, with the people you work with directly, is this question of, well, how do I evaluate somebody who has a different job cadence? They're doing biz dev work versus doing sales work. How do I evaluate that? Are they doing, strategic work versus tactical work? And I think it's about that process is about the allocation of time, and where you as a leader can really help the people who not only work for you, but the people you work for, is helping them make sure they're applying their time properly. And it's really tough to make those choices. I'm working on a project with a friend of mine back in Massachusetts, and I cannot, to save my life, get time to help her with that project. We're writing a book together, and I can't get time to do this. I just can't. Um, as much as I want to, because she's a dear friend and I really care about getting this done, and I cannot get my time, even though we've basically written it over the last 2 years. I can't get my time to pull it together. Now, hopefully I'll have that on Friday after I'm done with everything, Deirdre, that you have told me to allocate time to, right? But you've helped me, figure out. But I'm going to get there because I'm close. I'm only a few chapters away from having edited near the end. And then, Deirdre, you will get it. You don't even know about this project, but I didn't want to put that on your plate, letting you wait for something that's going to take me a year to deliver. But that's where it helps, is this point about helping you judge your allocation of time. I don't think that is micromanaging. And you and I talk about this every single day. And I don't think about that being something where you're micromanaging me. I think it is about you're advising me on on another view of how I'm allocating my time. And there are frequently times when you will say to me, have you built in enough time for this? Right. And maybe we should move this date out because it's going to get too hard for you to accomplish everything that you need to accomplish in that period. So I'm going to stop now, Deirdre, because I know I think this is really a crucial concept to get across, because this is something I've struggled with when I've been leading people, and I know people struggle with on a daily. I think it's helpful to talk to all your people daily. I really do. No matter what their job cadence for delivery is, meaning getting something done. And your ability to guide the execution goes from daily or hourly or by the minute delivery, getting something done, to taking a very long period. But that daily interaction is more about the allocation of time. Is when it's a long, it's in that spectrum of making sure that they have gotten the best guidance on the allocation of their time. I know that's when you've been incredibly helpful to guide me through the last 3 years as I've been going through all this other stuff and helping me that way. And it's better for you because you're somewhat detached, so you can see it with a clearer view than those who are surrounding me doing it and trying to get this done. And we haven't stopped the whole time during this 3 years to try to move the ball forward in some way. So I'm going to stop here, Deirdre, let you take over and move the discussion in the direction you'd like to move it.
Yes, I'm going to finish up on this point and then move slightly obliquely. This is why I keep coming down to job descriptions, which most businesses treat as really boring. You know, you've got to fill out a form, you know, HR does it or so forth. But it's actually, to my mind, the job description which guides the work of the individual worker at the base level. And that is what tells the worker whether the worker is doing what is needed, one, for them to get a good review, two, for them to meet their goals or deliver their outcome in the vocabulary we're using today, but three, also to get a sense of how their work fits in with all of the other work in the organization. In other words, it's a tool for getting any individual beyond any sense of, oh, I'm just a person alone sitting in an office by my side. It's, I'm part of a team, I'm accomplishing this, this is what my group is doing. And this is why I think that, and I think Bossidy agrees, which is why Bossidy puts such an emphasis on people, that that the whole people processes, Drucker is very big on people, the need to get the right people in the right place as well. That's Peter Drucker in all of his work on management. In getting the right people in the right place, doing the right work at all levels throughout the organization. This is also, by the way, the importance of the communication that I mentioned earlier, and there's so much to say about that, but having communication all the time, repeated communication, making sure that everyone is getting it. I'm going to, as I call this an oblique jump because it's going to sound like a jump, but it actually connects directly with what we've just been talking about, that once you've done your execution and and you get to the second part of the accomplish thing, which is making your adjustments, you do that by assessing again. And you and I said just a few minutes ago, leaders are always assessing. But what leaders use to assess are the three questions that you and I keep presenting to people. The what am I missing? How are the motivations aligned? And is time my friend or enemy? The most important ones, and here's where it gets just the oblique connection, is that part of the assessment always must be in terms of what am I missing? Am I missing an alignment of people? Am I missing that something is off in the goal structure? Am I missing that this department didn't get the word about how their processes should change? So the assessment about people in terms of what am I missing almost always must look down to the level of what are the people doing, what are the processes involved, what are the goals, are the right goals, is everything in the right place? In a slightly oblique way, also that ties to the motivations. Now, sometimes motivations can be bad, sometimes they're good. Sometimes, and we hope that they're good in these terms, sometimes in an organization, if attention has not been paid to making sure that one department, for example, has the right job descriptions, that has the right goals, that the manager knows what that department is supposed to be accomplishing, the motivations may be off on that department simply because they don't know what the motivation should be. The motivations are in the heart good, but in terms of the organizational structure, bad. That's where the assessment gets down truly, and I'm going into this in a little detail so that people truly understand how the assessment process must get down to that level. You and I have both seen it, Tom, back in the industrial age, that one secretary somewhere in an organization can just throw a whole initiative off because they're resisting an initiative. In that same way, if one department doesn't get the message, doesn't get the right goals, the right job descriptions, the right training, understand how their work fits in with the rest of the organization, then execution for a whole initiative may be off. Not because people are resisting or bad. They just didn't get the word. They didn't get the right communication. They don't know to do the right things. But let's stay on the assessment a little further, simply because you and I spent so much time talking about assessment, and now we're bringing it in to show that this whole organizing structure is one entire structure. Assess, decide, accomplish. We can talk about them, and we are talking about them as three different things, but they're all interlaced. Because if you're down in your accomplish and you need to make adjustments, you have to bring in the assess, which means that you're looking at your three questions again. What am I missing? Are the motivations aligned? That's how I'm changing the question of motivations a little bit here. But it's also, is time my friend or enemy? Because as part of any plan, the leader has to have a timeline, needs to communicate when things need to be accomplished so people are working in the right cadence, to bring in a word that we've been talking about a lot. But let's look at the fullness of the assessment. It has to involve the technology. Are people using the technology in the right way? Do they know about how to use the technology? Are they doing their work in terms of the technology that we're trying to push here, or that we're introducing here, and so forth? Marketplace. Is my strategy down at the level of department executing? Is it delivering in the marketplace what I want to accomplish in that marketplace? All part of the assessment. In terms of products and services, are my products and services proving now in my assessment here, in the execution of my strategy, doing the right thing? Is the work being done down at the department level or the group level or the team level in terms of doing the right things by the products and services? And that could be something as simple as, is the customer service department giving the right answers to the people in the marketplace so that execution gets done correctly, and so forth? All comes down to job descriptions and communications and so forth. Operations, is everything operating properly? And that includes the processes. Do I have to change processes? Again, too many leaders think about processes as ironclad, as carryovers from the industrial age. We've always done things this way. We'll always do things. That is the worst type of thinking for a leader in the digital age. Every process must always, always be assessed in terms of, am I accomplishing the right things through this process? And if not, frequently, and I'll tell you, this is my experience, Tom, and it could be yours as well. And you and I have done so much execution. Frequently, it's one aspect of a process that throws execution off. Someone may think that they're still doing the right thing, and they're not. And I'll give you an example just so listeners understand this. In one reorganization that I was involved in, one particular person was in charge of the distribution lists in the organization, and that's the distribution lists for communications and materials. That person was not told that the distribution lists would have to be adjusted to meet the reorganization. So the distribution of materials and information just went on until we figured out that people were not getting the right. It came down to making sure that the distribution lists were right. It wasn't any sort of bad thinking on the part of this person. This person was never brought into the process change to change the internal distribution here. That's the sort of thing that can just wreck the execution of a whole strategy. We've talked about workforce, the people always has to be looked at. Also the list governance. Frequently things like cybersecurity, regulation, and so forth are sort of the unknowns in strategies. Frequently, too frequently, leaders don't understand all of the implications of regulations in setting out the execution of policies. But this is, regulation. Are we filling out the right forms that the government needs to make sure that we're doing the right things in terms of data security? That's the sort of thing that can be missed unless leaders are constantly assessing. Um, and then all of these assessments and all of the types of things I'm talking about become adjustments. And those adjustments aren't simply made at the strategic level or the plan level. They need to be communicated down to all the people involved so that the work itself for each individual is adjusted. And now the new work goes on. So what I'm trying to do here is really show the breadth of assessment that needs to happen and how assessment is critical just all over the place, just to make sure that the execution happens as it should thoroughly. I'm going to stop again and throw it back to you, Tom.
So, on the point of process, Deirdre, you and I will take process, and I'd like to take process apart and show how process is adapted to or translated into the digital age from the industrial age. And that was the point you're making. There is a translation that occurs. And I want to take the subject of translation because one of the key aspects, and actually you and I have talked about this in relation to good literature, that good literature is not written always in English, right?
Yes.
And so anybody who says, well, a process was invented in the industrial age, it must not be valid. It could be that you have a bad translator. And it's much the same about certain books I mentioned to you that I like, that when I read them in college I didn't relate to me, but somebody has done a new translation and they're wonderful.
Right.
And I mentioned the Iliad and the Odyssey with the current translation from the woman at University of Pennsylvania, just outstanding. And they resonate with me now as opposed to there, but it's the same work. It was just translated to meet the needs of today's society. And that's what you and I think is really, really important, is to take what we think are outstanding concepts from the past and translate them. And the same thing holds true for a good leader. They have to translate these things, such as a culture they want, into the language of the workforce. Now, how that occurs has to be really well thought through. And that's the point you're making. Now, the point about motivations and alignment is really interesting because this question doesn't come up so much from people that are in the digital age or digital natives, but it does come up from people that are that are schooled in the industrial age or being taught using the industrial age metaphor in the digital age, right? They don't understand this concept of alignment. And the simple answer for alignment is motivational alignment. That's all it is, right? So when somebody says, is my organization aligned or not? Do I have good alignment? It's all about, well, what is the base motivation of the workforce, and are they all aligned together in what they're doing, the key elements of what they're doing? And we think that's why question number 2 is about alignment. You're assessing the alignment of, not really alignment, but your assessment of the motivations of everyone involved in what you're looking at, and how do they align or not align? How misaligned are they? Where is that misalignment? And is that, in one case, it could be an opportunity for you, and in another, it could be a problem for you, or it could be both. And it's a question of how do you manage that? And then that becomes the part of that third question. Okay, how does time factor in how I can adjust that or deal with that, right? As I try to decide. So when you're talking about execution, I want to come back to now raising it back up. It's about defining the outcome, right? This execution meaning accomplish something, getting
Right.
something done or a series of things done. It's about defining that outcome. What are those things you want done? And then making sure that translates into a value exchange that makes sense for you. And
Mhm.
as those that have followed what we talk about when we talk about value exchange is not necessarily monetary. It can definitely have monetary aspects. And it certainly does in the capitalist world and so forth. But there's a lot of organizations that have a much more subtle and a much more complex value exchange than others. And we just refer you to other work we've done on defining value exchange. But that outcome, ultimately, it's about value exchange. Are you getting the value exchange that you need to get that
Mhm.
you've defined for whatever it is you'd like to accomplish? The second is making sure you have a plan that'll get you there. And that's about reverse engineering from the outcome to do that and doing it in a way that either defines accomplishing a thing or allocating time to get to that thing. And then
Mhm.
the execution is that cycle that you've defined is about evaluating, making sure you're evaluating based on everything we've just talked about. And you are then adjusting based on that as that process continues to go, whether that process is informal or not. And like I said, we'll do more work on process, value exchange, time, this time thing. That these are all concepts I think that are really helpful to elucidate for a leader
Mhm.
as we're starting to talk through this. So with that, Deirdre, I just come back to the point about organizational cadence, job cadence, getting things done, time you're sitting on a digital platform, and that your current workforce has a large percentage whose metaphor of learning is through doing rather than being instructed. And even if they themselves are going through a process of instruction, the instruction itself is better if it's biased towards the doing. And that is an incredibly complex process, as you and I both know, because that's what we do for a living these days. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you, Deirdre, for the last 5 minutes to summarize things for us. We're never done on these videos, as you all know. And I just want to assure my friend who actually lives across the border from Massachusetts and New Hampshire, and that by the time she watches this video, which she may never watch, but if she does watch this video, I will have already delivered the first draft of the book to her. So it's old news by the time she sees this, but I wanted her to make sure she realizes that, Deirdre, she's not going through, wait a minute, I've already got the first draft.
Okay.
That's setting an accomplishment for me, Deirdre, which means I've got about 3 weeks.
Okay. Um, we've spent a lot of time in this conversation on the first two parts of accomplish. Remember, there's a third part to accomplish. The first two parts are execute the plan and then adjust as needed. The third part is achieve the outcome. And what that means is that you need to make sure that you are meeting your goals. Now, I'm going to throw something out here because we're talking now about leaders who are being hit by all of the disruption and transformation in the digital age, who are hearing all sorts of things, maybe under time pressure from the board and so forth, and talk about how it's important for the assessment and the adjustment to be of goals as well as of execution of the strategy. It may be, for example, that a leader is hearing from the board, communication up from the digital natives, and so forth, that we've got to build generative AI into our strategy. So the leader, on the basis of current information, builds something into the strategy and then monitors the execution. And if it turns out, and you and I think that generative AI needs more use cases before it can really be done in corporations, but we also know that leaders are human and may feel pressured into building something into a strategy. If it turns out that the goals and the use of the generative AI cannot be met, whether it's because of the culture of the organization or the needs of the marketplace or the ecosystem or whatever, the leader needs to assess that goal and be able to say, I can't adjust this yet. Sometimes the goals these days in the digital age, given all of the disruption and the noise and chatter and pressure and so forth, just may not be achievable yet because the technology is not yet at a point where it can meet the goals that may have been articulated. So what I'm trying to bring into this is a little freedom and sanity. You used the word sanity, almost an hour ago, in terms of the leader creating a strategy. Sometimes the leader needs to bring sanity into the assessment of whether goals are being met and can be met, so that those goals themselves may have to be adjusted even while the strategy is being executed overall. So the extension of adjustment goes to the outcomes as well. And I mean, there's so much to say on this, Tom, unless I had another hour to go off on the other tangents here. I think I'd better stop here.
Okay, that's
Okay.
good. And so where the trick is this in the point you were just making is a matter of how are you adjusting the risk factor in that next step, right? And how are you dealing with the time factor? So that's where great leadership comes in, is that evaluating, assessing, all right, what am I doing to the risk? What am I doing to time?
Right.
And how do I manage that in the process? It's a fascinating subject and it will keep us in business for a long time, dear.
I
Um,
hope so. Okay. That is looking forward to further conversations on this.
there you go. There you go. It's always a pleasure.
Yes, it is, Tom. So long for now.